In the spring of 2003, Lena Kowalski, a woman of 28 with hands already calloused from years of greenhouse work, was handed a letter she hadn't asked for and a decision she hadn't been given a choice in. The letter was from a development company called Meridian Group, and it informed her, not asked, not consulted, informed, that the wetlands bordering her family's lavender and herb farm on the Oregon coast were about to be purchased by the county, rezoned, and converted into the foundation of a luxury wellness resort called the Tidal Crest. She was not supposed to care, according to the letter. The wetlands were county land, not hers. They had simply used the phrase adjacent property owners as a courtesy, a legal box to be checked. The real purpose of the letter, she understood immediately, was to prepare her for what came next. 3 days later, the men arrived. Let me tell you about that meeting, because it matters. There were 2 of them, not 3. Mr. Paxton, who introduced himself as the Regional Director of Development, and Mr. Ree, who said very little and took notes in a small leather notebook. They came in a silver SUV with Oregon plates that looked brand new, and they wore the kind of outdoor clothing you buy at a catalog store and never actually wear outdoors. They met her in her driveway, which is to say they walked through her gate without knocking and found her there, up to her elbows in a potting trough, transplanting a flat of lemon thyme. She did not stand up to greet them. Mr. Paxton spoke first. He was a man with the particular confidence of someone who has never been told no by someone who meant it. He talked about the resort's vision. He talked about eco-conscious design and sustainable tourism, and the economic revitalization of the coastal corridor. He used the word curated 4 times. He told her that the Tidal Crest would bring a level of clientele to this stretch of coastline that would, and he paused here, lift all boats. He smiled at his own metaphor. They were on the coast, after all. Then he told her the real reason they had come. The resort planned to expand its property boundary. They wanted to purchase the southern acre of her farm, the strip of land where her grandmother's original glass greenhouse still stood. It was old, he said, leaning slightly toward the word, as if it explained everything. It blocked the sight line from the resort's proposed Ocean View Terrace. They were prepared to offer her a very generous relocation package. She could build a new greenhouse, a better one, somewhere else. Lena set down her trowel. She looked at the greenhouse. Her grandmother, Annalise Kowalski, had built it in 1961 with her husband and 2 neighbors, using salvaged glass panes from a demolished school in Portland. The frame was old-growth fir. The hinges were hand-forged. In the summer, it smelled of basil and warm earth in a way that no engineered structure ever would again. The lavender she grew in it was descended from a cutting her grandmother had brought over from a farm in the Willamette Valley decades ago. The plants had never left this land. They had never needed to. The greenhouse isn't for sale, Lena said. Neither is the acre. Mr. Paxton tilted his head the way people do when they are deciding whether to treat you as a child or as an obstacle. He chose for the moment to treat her as a child. Mrs. Kowalski, he said, I want to be straight with you. This project is happening. The county has approved the permits. The resort will be built. The only question is whether your operation here becomes part of a thriving new landscape, or whether it becomes something that has to work around one. He left a folder on top of her potting trough. She did not open it. Mr. Ree wrote something in his notebook. They drove out in the silver SUV, and she watched it go, and she put her hands back in the dirt. Now, let me tell you about Lena, because the men in that SUV saw only what they expected to see. They saw a young woman alone on a small farm with muddy knees and no lawyer on the phone. They saw a charming inconvenience. They did not see that she had a degree in horticultural science from Oregon State. They did not see that she had spent 3 years apprenticing on farms in Vermont and Northern California before coming home to take over the operation after her grandmother's death. They did not see that she had already turned down 2 previous buyout offers. Over the years, both from hotel groups, both for more money than she had any immediate use for. They did not see the notebook her grandmother had kept. Annalise had kept meticulous records, not just of plantings and harvests and soil amendments, but of observations, of what the land liked and did not like, of which winds came from which direction and what they carried, of which guests who had bought lavender bundles at the roadside stand kept coming back, of what they said when they came. She had written in her notebook, in her careful European cursive, things like, "The woman from Portland said she came back because she couldn't find lavender anywhere that smelled like ours. She said it smelled like being somewhere real." Lena had read that notebook so many times that certain pages had softened at the corners. She had her grandmother's words the way a person carries a stone in their pocket. She knew exactly what her grandmother would have said about Mr. Paxton. She would have said, "Let him build his thing. Then do yours better." The construction began that autumn, and it was exactly as brutal as you might imagine. The equipment arrived first, earth movers and concrete trucks that turned the coastal road into a rutted disaster. The sound was relentless from 7 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, a grinding mechanical percussion that drove the shorebirds from the wetlands and unsettled her bees. She kept 14 hives near the south boundary of the property, and the vibration from the heavy equipment ran through the ground like a low, constant alarm. Honey production dropped by 30% that first season. The lavender bloomed on schedule because lavender does not care about the opinions of construction crews. But the bees were confused, and without the bees, pollination suffered. The dust was the other thing. It settled on the greenhouse glass in a fine gray film that had to be wiped down every few days, or it diffused the light and the seedlings stretched too pale. She was wiping down greenhouse panes in the morning and laying row cover at dusk, and somewhere in between she was managing the farm stand, fulfilling wholesale orders for 3 restaurants in Cannon Beach and keeping the accounts. The people in town were not unkind, but they were not encouraging either. The owner of the hardware store, who had known Lena since she was small, shook his head every time she came in for supplies. "Girl, that place is going to be 400 rooms, he told her once, sliding a box of irrigation fittings across the counter. "You know what 400 rooms means? Buses, shuttles, parking structures. This whole road is going to be different. You sure you don't want to take what they're offering and move up the valley somewhere quieter?" She thanked him. She bought her fittings. She drove home. The doubt came, as it always does, in winter. Let me be precise about this, because the doubt is the important part of the story, the part that people who tell stories like this often skip over because they want to get to the triumph. But the doubt is not a sign of weakness. The doubt is how you find out what you actually believe. It came on a January night when the rain was coming in sideways off the Pacific, and she was sitting at the kitchen table trying to make the numbers work for the coming season. Honey production down. Lavender yield reduced. Her largest wholesale account had cut their order by half because the construction traffic made the delivery route unreliable. She was not in danger of losing the farm. Not quite, but she could see the shore of that possibility from where she sat. She got up and went to the window. The resort, halfway built, was lit up on the north side of the wetlands. Cranes with blinking red lights. The skeleton of the main lodge, enormous and angular, rising against the dark sky. It was going to be something, she admitted to herself. It was going to be large and expensive and polished, and it was going to bring the kind of people who had never had any reason to stop on this stretch of coast before. Her grandmother's folder was in the kitchen drawer. Not Mr. Paxton's folder, the resort's latest offer letter, which had arrived 6 months ago, and which Lena had dropped into the drawer without opening, just as she had done with the ones before it. She crossed the kitchen. She put her hand on the drawer. She thought about the greenhouse. She thought about the lavender plants. 40 years in this soil. She thought about what her grandmother had written. Smelled like being somewhere real. She thought about the people who were going to fill 400 rooms across the wetlands. She closed the drawer. She sat back down at the table, and she got a fresh piece of paper, and she started writing, not numbers this time, but an idea. It was not a complicated idea. It was the kind of idea that only seems obvious after someone has the courage to believe in it. The people who were going to come to that resort, she wrote, they were coming the coast. They were coming for the coast. They were coming because something in the constructed perfection of their daily lives had gotten too loud, and they needed a place where things grew out of the ground and smelled like themselves. The resort was going to give them an ocean view and a spa menu. It was not going to give them the thing they had actually come looking for. She knew what that thing was. She had grown up surrounded by it. She was going to give them the farm. She started the following spring, just as the resort was finishing its final construction phase. She did not announce anything. She did not print brochures. She put a hand-lettered sign at the end of her drive, simple pine board with dark green letters, Kowalski Farm, open Saturday mornings. Lavender, herbs, honey. Come see the greenhouse. 7 people stopped the first Saturday. They were mostly local, curious about the sign. She walked them through the greenhouse, showed them the lavender rows, explained how she harvested and distilled the essential oil in small batches. She let a woman with a toddler on her hip rub a sprig of fresh rosemary between her fingers and hold it up to the child's nose. She let an older man in a rain jacket taste honey directly from the comb. He stood there for a long moment with his eyes closed. "My mother kept bees," he said finally. "I haven't tasted honey like this since I was 10 years old." She understood in that moment what she was actually selling. She was not selling lavender. She was selling the memory of something true. The resort opened in the summer of 2004. It was everything Mr. Paxton had promised his investors. The main lodge had cathedral ceilings and a restaurant with a James Beard-nominated chef. There were tidal pool tours and kayak rentals and a spa that used Pacific sea salt in its treatments. The rooms started at $400 a night, and they were full. The guests were exactly what she had imagined. They came from Portland and San Francisco and Seattle, from places where everything was optimized and scheduled and delivered in 45 minutes. They came to the coast because some part of them remembered that the world had a smell and a texture that no app could replicate. They went on the kayak tour. They ate at the restaurant. They sat on their ocean view terraces with a glass of wine and looked at the view, and then they looked down at the farm. It was visible from the resort's south-facing rooms. Just the greenhouse, the lavender rows in their silver-green stripes, the small barn with the smoke from the distillery chimney rising on still days. It looked like nothing. It looked like everything. The first resort guest came on a Tuesday, off-season, not a Saturday. She knocked on the farmhouse door looking faintly embarrassed, the kind of person who was not accustomed to knocking on strangers' doors. She was staying at the resort for a week and had seen the farm from her window and asked the concierge about it, and the concierge hadn't known what to say. She had walked over on her own. Her name was Dr. Hartwell, and she was a cardiologist from Palo Alto, and she told Lena that she could not remember the last time she had held a shovel. She spent 3 hours on the farm that day. She transplanted seedlings. She learned how to check a hive without disturbing the bees. She went back to her room at the resort, and she did not leave her terrace for the rest of the afternoon. But she had dirt under her fingernails, and she seemed, according to the housekeeper who turned down her room that evening, deeply content. She told everyone she knew. Word of mouth on the Oregon coast moves the way the fog moves, quietly, thoroughly, and then all at once you can't see past it. By the second summer, Lena was running structured farm sessions on Saturdays and Sunday mornings. Guests from the resort walked over in their resort-issued slippers and wool socks, crunching down the gravel path in the mornings before breakfast. She had hired a part-time helper, a young man named Tobias who had grown up on a sheep farm in Central Oregon and had the particular gift of explaining animal husbandry to people who had never touched a farm animal in a way that made them feel capable rather than ignorant. She added a tasting table under the eaves of the barn. Nothing elaborate, a long cedar plank on sawhorses covered in a canvas cloth. She put out lavender honey, dried herb bundles, small bottles of her distilled lavender oil, and whatever was coming out of the garden that week. On cold mornings, she made a lavender honey tea. People stood at that table for far longer than any reasonable person expected. She added a waiting list that autumn. She had not intended to. It simply became necessary. The resort's management noticed before Mr. Paxton did. They noticed it the way hotel managers always notice things, through numbers that don't behave the way they should. Guests were checking in and immediately asking the concierge about the farm next door. The spa bookings after 10 in the morning on Saturdays were dropping. The late Sunday breakfast service was down. Guests were waking up early, a thing that did not happen at wellness resorts, and walking across the property line to stand in a field and look at lavender plants before 8 in the morning. The concierge, a young woman named Adriana, who had grown up in Astoria and understood the coast in a way her management did not, simply started giving guests directions to Kowalski Farm as a matter of course. She did this because guests who had been to the farm were measurably happier for the rest of their stay. She could not explain it in a training document. It was simply true. Mr. Paxton came himself in the late summer of the second year of the resort's operation. He did not knock either. He came on a Saturday morning and found 40 people standing in Lena's lavender field while she talked about pollinator diversity and the specific mineral content of the coastal soil. He stood at the edge of the group for 15 minutes, watching. When she was done, he waited until the crowd had dispersed toward the tasting table, and then he walked over to her. He was wearing the same kind of catalog outdoor wear, though this time it looked a little more worn. He did not extend his hand. "You have a waiting list," he said. 3 months, she confirmed. He looked at the tasting table. He looked at the greenhouse. He looked at the lavender rows. He was doing the math the way developers do math, in square footage and per capita revenue, and what any given thing could become if it were scaled. "I'd like to talk about a partnership," he said. "Now let me stop here, because this is the part of the story where things could have gone wrong. A partnership with a 400-room resort means money, yes. It means exposure and logistic support and a referral pipeline that would have taken Lena 10 years to build on her own. It also means agreements, minimums, brand alignment. The word curated again. Lena had thought about this possibility. She had thought about it since that first Saturday when the woman from Portland had closed her eyes over a bunch of lavender and said, "I've been looking for this for years." She knew what the resort would want to do with the farm. They would want to package it. They would want to make it part of a tier. They would want to turn it into an experience. She made one condition, and it was not negotiable. "I run the farm," she said. "You can tell your guests it exists. You can list it in your materials. But I decide what happens here. the schedule, the size of the groups, what we grow, what we don't. You get no say in the greenhouse. Mr. Paxton started to speak. She held up one hand. The moment this becomes a demonstration, she said, it stops being real. And the moment it stops being real, it stops being worth anything to either of us. You know that. You wouldn't be standing here if you didn't know that. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the greenhouse again, at the old fir frame and the salvaged glass panes and the lavender plants that had been in that soil since before he was born. Agreed, he said. They shook hands. No folder, no contract yet, though that came later. Just a handshake on a Saturday morning, with the smell of lavender in the air and the sound of the ocean a quarter-mile away. The arrangement held, and here is how you know it held, because Lena never changed the size of the groups. She never added a second Saturday session to capture more throughput. She never installed anything she called an experience pavilion. She kept the tasting table under the barn eave. She kept the cedar plank on sawhorses. The resort added a line to its signature package, includes priority access to Saturday morning sessions at Kowalski Farm. That package became their second highest seller within 18 months. Guests flew from New York and Chicago and Los Angeles to stand in a lavender field on the Oregon coast and listen to a woman talk about bees and soil in a way that made them feel, for a few hours, that the world was still something they could put their hands into. The resort went through 2 ownership changes in the following decade. The second new management team, a hospitality group from Seattle, made an offer to Lena to expand the farm partnership into a full branded concept. They wanted Kowalski Farm locations at 3 other properties. They wanted to license the name. She thanked them and declined. She wrote them a letter, short and clear, and at the end of it, she wrote the thing her grandmother had written in the notebook all those years ago. Smelled like being somewhere real. You can't license real, she wrote. If you could, it wouldn't be. They did not argue. They knew she was right. They had seen what happened when things got too far from real. They had watched it happen in their own industry for years. There came an afternoon some years later now, when Lena was out by the south field mending the low-wire fence that ran along the lavender rows. Her daughter, Rosie, was 7 years old and had been following her at a distance the way 7-year-olds do, interested but not yet willing to commit. The resort's main lodge was visible across the wetlands, its windows catching the afternoon light. Rosie came up beside her and pointed across the water. "Is that the place that wanted to take our greenhouse?" she asked. Lena thought about how to answer that. She thought about Mr. Paxton and his catalog clothing and his word curated. She thought about that silver SUV in her driveway. She thought about the January night at the kitchen table with her hand on the drawer. They wanted to take the acre the greenhouse is on, she said. They thought it was in their way. Rosie looked at the greenhouse, then back at the resort. But it wasn't in their way, she said. It turned into their best thing. Lena handed her the wire pliers. She showed her how to check the tension, how to find the spot where the wire had gone slack and work the connection point back tight. "Your great-grandmother built that greenhouse," Lena said, "because she believed that what this land grew was worth protecting. She didn't fight anyone to protect it. She just kept growing." Rosie held the pliers carefully with both hands the way Lena had shown her. "Is that what we do?" she asked. "We just keep growing?" Lena looked down at her daughter, at the wire in her small hands, at the lavender rows running long and silver green behind them, the same plants, the same soil, 40-some years in this ground. "That's what we do," she said. "The resort is still there. It is on its 3rd ownership now, and its current marketing materials feature a photograph of the Kowalski Farm greenhouse taken from the South Terrace at sunrise. The image is on the landing page of their website and in their print catalog and on the cards in every room. They did not ask permission for the first version, which led to a brief and unpleasant conversation, and then an ongoing licensing arrangement that funds the farm's seed account every year. Lena Kowalski is in her 40s now. Her hair has picked up a few strands of silver at the temples, the same color as the lavender in July. She still runs the Saturday sessions herself. She still wipes down the greenhouse glass on Tuesday mornings. The tasting table is still a cedar plank on sawhorses under the barn eave, because there is no reason to change a thing that is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. The greenhouse stands where it has always stood. The lavender is in its 40-some-odd year of this soil. The bees have been in their hives long enough that the hives themselves feel like part of the landscape. And somewhere in the farmhouse kitchen, in a drawer that gets stuck a little in the humid months, there is a folder from a development company called Meridian Group that was never opened. It is still there. It will stay there. Some things you keep not because they have value, but because they remind you of the exact moment you decided who you were. The land remembers. The lavender remembers. And Lena Kowalski, who put her hand on that drawer on a cold January night and chose not to open it, remembers most of all.